What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Phoenix channel. Today is Saturday, April 4th. Beautiful day here in Phoenix. If you like this content, consider hitting that like button. Consider subscribing to this channel. Sorry about the delay today. I know we were supposed to start a little earlier, and I got a little carried away putting together some notes for the show and just chatting it up. So apologize for that in advance, but I want to thank you guys for tuning in, those that are on. So I do have up the chat, so if you have questions, go ahead and hit us up in the chat. This is a free-flowing Q&A type discussion, low-key on a Saturday. Hope you guys got outside, got some vitamin D, taking care of yourselves during this quarantine period, which we'll talk about more. So a couple items I did want to talk to you guys about today. Obviously, we have the news concerning Block One's alleged new civil lawsuit brought together by, it looks like, some individual investors. Obviously, before we get more into anything on this show, I do want to mention that none of this is investment advice. So make sure you do your own due diligence and homework. And I want to give a shout out to both TJ and Cryptoff for tuning in. What's going on, guys? How's your Saturday shaping up? Let me know. Let me know in the chat. How's it going? So yeah, we received news today about B1's alleged. I'm gonna bring up the article here. Class action lawsuit, and so it looks like there was some filing here. Alleging that while B1 was managed to swiftly clear things up with the SEC, there is some type of issues still with individual investors and perceptions that what had been issued was perhaps a security and maybe now a need or a chase of money, essentially, is what it comes down to, I think, for these individual investors. I think there was one investor out of New York and another one out of Texas. Usually with these guys, I mean, it seems like just based on the number of groups that are involved in these suits, it looks like a group that's actually looking to get paid more than anything else. I think they're also going after some exchanges. So we'll have to see how this one evolves, but most of these well-funded companies, I think as a tactic, they usually would delay any kind of immediate action on these suits, and it could go on for a number of months or years. So we're just going to have to see how this one transpires in terms of the folks that are bringing the lawsuit, to see if they have the funding to maintain and continue that, because usually what you see is delays in court hearings, and it just ratchets up the fees, and a group that isn't well funded to pursue those fees usually just needs to withdraw their claims and allegations or have some kind of a light settlement. So let me know what you guys think about that in the chat. Do you guys have thoughts on B1's alleged civil lawsuit that's going on right now? Let me know in the chat, guys. So a couple other things I wanted to go over today. One being the potential market scenarios. We talked a little bit last week about just this whole corona, COVID-19 quarantine, and looking at what potential scenarios could happen. And so I thought I'd share those with you guys today and bounce those off you guys, see if you guys have similar thoughts. I think part of being a crypto investor, or whether you're investing in EOS or investing, I should say, none of this is investment advice, but if you are holding some crypto, a good rule of thumb or good practice is to just be aware of market sentiments and changes in the market. That is a prerequisite for any investments. And so what I wanted to do today for myself and want to share with you guys is going through some potential scenarios as it relates not only to cryptos but all different kinds of assets, and what type of risk or impact we would see based on the likelihood of an extended quarantine period or severity in the issues that I think we are being told are present in some areas. And so, just to recap for those that are maybe watching this on the replay or watching this way later, right now in the United States at least, we have a couple different quote unquote hot spots, cities within the US, which are seeing increases in ICU hospitalizations allegedly pertaining to the COVID-19 issue. So Seattle's a hot spot. We have Los Angeles as a hot spot. And obviously New York is taking the brunt of these stresses, at least in the hospital sector. So with that, the country is currently, for the most part, with the exception of I think 9 states, in a lockdown. So Arizona is one of those. Here in Phoenix, we are under a lockdown of some kind. It's not a hard lockdown, so people are able to travel pretty freely, but it is, at least on paper, a pretty rigorous lockdown. Now, I know of other places like Los Angeles where I have a lot of friends still, where it's a much more restrictive lockdown, where in fact they're not even able to visit and enjoy the beach, which I thought was pretty interesting, if you ask me. But that's what we're hearing in places like LA in terms of that lockdown occurring. I'm wondering if you guys are seeing anything in your neck of the woods. Are you guys being impacted by the lockdown? Let me know in the chat what you guys are seeing. But with that said, because of this lockdown situation already here in the region, we're seeing a lot of what I would characterize as discretionary type businesses and services file, essentially getting plans to file for bankruptcy or asking for some type of a bailout. So you think of things like bars and restaurants and even things like commercial real estate in some cases where they rent it out to others. They're seeing ratcheting down of interest in their services or their properties. And so that's leading to just a ripple effect across the board here. So looking at that then and extrapolating that out to a 3-month period. So this has probably only been the case here locally, probably for the last, I would say, 3 weeks, or I would even say maybe even 2 weeks. But if we start to extrapolate this out to, say, 12 weeks, which would be 3 months, we have to start looking at, as investors, what the impact would be for something like crypto, a Bitcoin, or an EOS, and understand what the potential risk or benefits might be. So for a 3-month scenario, or less than 3-month scenario, so what I did is I looked at 3 months, 6 months, and a 12-month scenario. And what that is assuming is looking at the likelihood or the chance of what would happen under each of those cases and what the narrative would be for something like a crypto or other types of assets. So I wanted to go through this with you guys. So a couple categories we looked at, looking at basic essentials, which is food, rentals, law and order, banking, and travel. So why did I pick those? Well, essentially, no matter what society you're in, pretty much as a human, in order to survive, you need to have food, right? You need to be able to eat. You need to have shelter, a place to sleep, and socialize maybe with other people, safely, of course. You need some kind of law and order because you probably have stuff that's either on you or stuff you have around you that is yours, and you're in possession of those. And so you want to make sure that you don't get jacked, right? Hopefully. Banking is essential because it's unlikely that in this economy we have currently that you are self-sustaining, meaning the place where you live doesn't have all the food, it doesn't have all the water, it doesn't have all the electricity. So you likely need to have uh, transactions, right, to purchase different goods and services. And banking would allow you to at least purchase those essentials we talked about. And then travel, which would be either on a local basis, such as roads that allow you to go from point A to point B, or it could even be domestic or international. Now, for a 3 month type of period, or less than 3 month type period, and I'm going to get into the likelihood of this being the case, just at a high level, I don't think personally this is a event that would even be over in 3 months. It's just my personal take on it, just based on what we're hearing about potential solutions and ramping up treatment of this issue. We're also looking at different peaks across the country. So even though we have regions in New York or Seattle, which are supposed to peak in, say, the April or May timeframe, we have other regions which may have peaks that shift out several months from there. So we may not be through the whole process till much later. TJ is mentioning here, U.S. will be hit hard. Unemployment rate is increasing rapidly. A lot of people can't afford health insurance, and in Holland, we've been in lockdown light for 2.5 weeks now. And TJ, we're pretty much in the same boat here. I think this is my 3rd week in this type of mode. I'm obviously outside today getting some vitamin D, but it's essentially a lockdown, light lockdown, I would say. And we've heard anecdotal evidence which suggests like 30% unemployment here. But so with the 3 month scenario we just talked about, let's look at each of those components. Food. So if we rate these on a scale of 1 to 10 and say 1 is little or no impacts to that component, and 10 is a high impact, like a 100-year chance of a really severe thing happening, and a 5 would be maybe a typical recessionary environment. I think for a 3 month type scenario for food, you're probably looking at a 4 to 5 type rating, where you would see some impacts to food disruptions or supplies, but probably not totally severe where you get apeshit civil unrest. In terms of shelter, housing, and rentals, again, a 4 to 5 in that. I think you'll see for the real estate owner, property owner, you'll see some disruptions in payments just because of the instability of jobs and frankly, earnings, right, for people to go out into the field and earn money for work. So that's still pretty high. It's probably this is our best case scenario. That would be in line with a typical recession, but that may not be the case. And I'm going to get back to that in a little bit here. Law and Order is the other one, guys, that we talked about. Law and Order, that's probably a 5. So, again, more of a traditional recessionary environment where you see some impacts, maybe higher rates of crimes, maybe burglaries, but not total apeshit type behavior or responses. And then travel is a 6, which is pretty high, but you got to keep in mind, guys, that a lot of corporations, even that I interact with, are on restrictions now. So, meaning while there is planes going from Phoenix to the East Coast, frankly, none of these partners want to actually go on the plane and travel. So while the planes are available, it's I think most people would agree they're not getting on a plane anytime soon within the next couple months. So most of those, again, are 4s to 5. So there is pretty significant impact, but probably still something that can correct, and we can restore the semblance of the system we have now. Some of the things I want to point out to you is that For food, you could see some supply disruptions in localized urban areas that may or may not warrant some type of civil unrest, but generally speaking, across the country, you probably won't see that. And for rentals, again, I did mention 30% unemployment in the short term. So that'll hit the rental markets, and with the majority of Americans having less than $400 in their bank accounts and also falling wages, I think you'll see a decline in the rental price in a lot of areas. Now, in terms of banking, corporations will still have a tough time to access financing and keep their businesses afloat. I'm not talking obviously about the big businesses that got the bailouts, but more the small businesses. And for travel, we'll probably also see some bankruptcies because of just the concerns and risk with cruises and new travel rules. So again, we're just at a high level for all that stuff. I think the chances of this are moderate to low, but this would be an ideal situation, believe it or not. And in terms of discretionary, we're rating that a 7. And that's because, remember guys, 7 means a pretty high impact. A 10 would be a 1 in 100 type event. So 7 is above a typical recession, but we rated it a 7 because we're already hearing about a lot of restaurant closures, and so a lot of the supply chains are going to be disrupted, and there's going to be some significant impacts to their cash balance sheets. So a lot of these restaurants, not so much the corporate ones, but medium-sized chains, do not have cash balances to sustain them for 6 months or even 3 months. So if you go out, say, a month, several weeks without revenues, it starts to impact their ability to keep their businesses open. So that's a pretty big hit to the local economy in terms of those discretionary businesses. And I think you'll also see a stigma that remains in effect for socialization even within that 3-month period. So that'll kill a lot of revenue for bars, local restaurants, and revenue. So pretty, I know, not great, guys, but that's the reality. We talked kind of about real estate, the fact that a lot of places, at least here, we got Airbnbs that are coming online and being sold. Now that that's drying up, that ability to get revenue is drying up in that Airbnb market. So a lot of those houses that would historically have been used for an Airbnb are now just actually being put on the market and being sold. And there still remains some deflationary conditions due to the willingness for people to, I think, just pay their rent. We're seeing a lot of that here because of the job losses and furloughs that are probably pending. So in terms of probably what you guys want to hear about, which is BTC, US dollars, and stocks. For BTC in this period of time, it's actually going to be down because it is more deflationary than it is inflationary. So I actually think the price of Bitcoin will fall for a type of a scenario like this in a 3-month period with government interventions in the short term to keep things afloat. Most people who receive the $1,200 are not going to spend the $1,200 on Bitcoin, guys. I mean, there are OGs like myself. I don't plan on really selling, and I don't anticipate a need to sell, but I think a lot of folks may find themselves in a position where they need to sell some of their assets just to pay for essential goods and services, and that may not even include rent. I mean, people may just start avoiding rent. We're going to talk more about that in the 6-month outlook, because I think if it goes beyond a 3-month period, I think you will start to see behavioral changes like that. But again, that 3-month scenario, I think BTC will actually fall or stay stagnant in price, which is not necessarily bad, guys, because if it may be that BTC falls or stays stagnant in price, along with EOS and other assets, but if they fall slower than other assets around, then that's actually not such a bad thing. So let me know what you guys think about that piece, if you agree with that. And the reasoning behind it, again, is because the demand for basic goods and services, for cash, will be so high that many holders will actually have to sell their BTC. It's not something they want to do, but that's just the reality of the situation. With US dollars, obviously there's going to be high demand in the short term, flight to safety, and also just to shore up different types of debts, right? And the demand for goods and services that are denominated in US dollars all around the world. So dollar would actually look pretty strong in the short term because of that. Or something like stocks, because people are, again, cashing out, would actually fall during this period of time. So BTC down or stable, US dollars up, and stocks down. That's kind of what we have for the 3-month window. In terms of the 6-month window, this is where it starts to get kind of crazy, guys, and I want to hear what you guys think about this, if you agree or not. But 6 months is when things start to, I think, unravel. And in terms of a likelihood, this is the intermediate window. So we have the 3-month, the 6-month, and the 12-month. The 6-month is the intermediate, likely, and fingers crossed that in the 6 months we can get solutions on treatments. We can flatten that curve overall across the globe, and some semblance back to perhaps what we have. Although if you're going out 6 months, there's some psychological and societal impacts which actually suggest substantial changes to the way we live and do work and pretty much do everything. So I want to go through that with you guys and see what you guys think. But in terms of food, rentals, law and order, banking, and travel, we're looking at like 7s to 8s. So that's pretty high, guys. That's above a typical recession, obviously. And so it's not something that we, and I say we, like people in the United States have experienced before, because we're so used to having food and law and order. But if you go out 6 months, okay, with a quarantine, there starts to be major issues with labor, first of all. So if you think about food, and food is, somewhat automated, but you still need labor to perform a lot of that work. And so if you get if the situation unravels so much that you can't even maintain essential labor to produce the goods, it could be food, it could be soap, it could be different things that are in the store. You actually will see significant supply shortages, right? And so that may go beyond even a typical prepper's capacity. I mean, if you think about maybe a moderate prepper has 6 months of food and goods, so this would be close to that region, which would put additional pressures on that market. With the rental market, if you take that out 6 months, that really starts to burden the property owners' forbearance, right? If you're going out 3 months, that's already pretty significant, because you're having to do, if you figure the house mortgage is, say, $1,500, 3 months would be, a little under $5,000. If you go out 6 months, you're, closer to 10, right? That's pretty significant. I think you start to get to a point where people just sense that their investment is no longer worth holding, and they're obviously have renters that are unwilling to pay um, for the bills associated with the property they are in. So it starts to unravel that social contract, which is a big risk here for society in general, along with the law and order being um, high amount of change in urbanized areas because of the food insecurity. Um, you might see extreme uh, responses behaviorally to civil disobedience and riots, some kind of uprisings. And with that, you'll get a failure of the local authorities to maintain that security or stability because of the overwhelming numbers of the people that are out doing it. And so that starts to suggest then a path to, fortunately, some kind of a martial law. So again, that's I think your moderate type of approach, and that's probably not great news, but it's, I think, important to have these kind of conversations and be aware of them, because there's a good chance that if it does go out 6 months, that those are the kinds of things you would be encountering just for basic essentials, right? And travel, travel with that in effect, travel would be almost non-existent. So jobs you're only looking at essential work for that 6-month window. So food distribution, internet, power, health, police, and logistics. In terms of discretionary, probably seeing close to the majority of those restaurants and bars and other commercial properties out of business. If you think about the average balance sheet of these companies, that 6 months seems like a lot of time, and it is, but most of these companies don't have those funding levels to sustain that. So only those businesses which own their properties and businesses outright will likely survive. And the same could be applied to real estate. So, and with that, you'll probably see a massive deflation in real estate, right? If you think about the price of a property, and I think we talked about this last week, guys, but the average place here, just to give some perspective, and I'd like to know what you guys, what the price of your properties are, but in your area. But here in Phoenix, I mean, you have some places that are going for nothing special, $400,000 to $500,000. So $400,000 to $500,000, that could be, 6, 7 times the average salary that is paid here. Whereas historically, I think it's been closer to 4. So you could actually see that obviously get squeezed down back to historical levels, along with an overall deflation on wages. So, and then in terms of Bitcoin, US dollars, and gold, BTC, during that course of time, because of the loss of faith, could actually see a stable to up type of behavior, and we're obviously discounting the Bitcoin halving. So I think there may be some arguments there about maybe Bitcoin halving playing an influence, right, to prop up the price. But we've never seen Bitcoin in this kind of environment, so it'll be really interesting to see how it responds. US dollars, in this case, I think you start to see that loss of confidence for it to be used as the global reserve currency. And gold, obviously, is going to rise in this time of uncertainty. So gold's looking good, Bitcoin's looking good, US dollars, not good. So, again, for those that are here, I'm kind of curious to know if that's in line with what you guys, have looked at, or you guys have gone through this exercise. Because, again, as an investor, I think these are the kinds of things you should be doing to prepare yourself, and just to have that outlook, right, on where things are going to be at. 12-month scenario, everything's essentially a 10 in terms of those categories we talked about. And if it does go out a year, guys, I think this actually results in a transition back to tribes. I know that sounds weird, but you would have more of a local type of arrangement and maybe even a whole rebalancing of ownership that isn't necessarily referencing the current law and order and legal structure on things that we have now. So probably before that happens would be a kind of a breakdown, unfortunately. Um, but I think for most of society, 1 year would be a limit on what would be allowed, and with that, U.S. dollars go to zero. I think because of all the pressure on printing money and trying to manipulate so many things. Gold is now probably a standard. BTC can be still an asset provided that we have stable power supply and internet. So that is a prerequisite here that we have to acknowledge is the requirements for that to actually use Bitcoin. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that? That's the 3, 6, and 12-month type scenarios. Thought those were pretty interesting to share. And what I'd like to do is over time, maybe revisit these with you guys, maybe on a monthly basis. Hopefully I don't have too many of those, but it'd be interesting to see if that kind of map out that we've just done plays out, if it accelerates. We don't know. And the other thing to keep in mind is information just comes along so fast now that maybe it doesn't take 6 months to 12 months for some of those things to happen. It could happen in a shorter period of time. But with that said, I thought I'd read over this, going back to B1's article here, and some of the, well, this is talking about the settlement, but I want to actually go to the class action lawsuit. So let me read you guys that. This is on decrypt.co, and this is referencing the class action lawsuits filed against, it says 11 Bitcoin companies. So you already know, guys, like off the bat, just based on that title, the title is misleading because Block One isn't a Bitcoin company, right? So whoever wrote this is, you could tell they're not necessarily competent in their domain, right? Because Block One's not a Bitcoin company. It says here, Red Wedding lawsuits were filed against Binance, BitMEX, Tron Foundation, and other major crypto companies alleging they sold unregistered securities. So in brief, what they mention here, 3 things. Class action lawsuits served against those 11 companies. The lawsuits focus on selling of cryptocurrency tokens, which are claimed to be unregistered securities. And one of those companies have obviously already settled with the SEC over an ICO, and that would be B1. So what this is alleging is a U.S. law firm actually issued a barrage of class action lawsuits aimed at Binance, Block One, BitMEX, Tron, and several others. The lawsuits alleged that the firms bilked investors by selling unlawful securities in the form of digital tokens. First spotted by the website Offshore Alert, 11 suits were filed on Friday by the New York litigation boutique firm Roche Cyrulnik Friedman against 42 defendants in the British Virgin Islands, Canada, Cayman Islands, China, Estonia, Hong Kong, Israel, Japan, Malta, Seychelles, Singapore, South Africa, Switzerland, Taiwan, US, and Vietnam. So, Offshore Alerts called the event crypto's own Red Wedding in reference to a coordinated massacre that took place in the popular HBO series Game of Thrones. So one thing that's interesting about these guys, this firm was notably the same law firm that was behind the Bitfinex market manipulation suit back in October 2019. And the firm also represents the Kleinman estate in its billion-dollar lawsuit against self-professed Bitcoin inventor Craig Wright. Um, so they all allege that the token issuers took advantage of the market's lack of understanding and awareness of how cryptocurrencies worked, and they sold these alleged illegal securities to U.S. citizens. Suit asserts that the companies pitched their tokens as utility tokens, which they claim did not need to be registered as securities. Many of the companies compare their tokens to Bitcoin and Ether, which are not considered securities. It wasn't apparent to the investors that these tokens needed to be registered with the U.S. SEC, the lawsuit said. So they're essentially, it seems like, using the Howey test as a check for determining at the time the ICO was offered whether that asset was a security under the U.S. federal law. And they cite here key tenets of failure of that test for those and are seeking damages to be determined at trial. So again, a money grab. And so you can kind of go through this article, guys. It's on decrypt.co. But in terms of Block 1, I'll just read you guys that because there's a number of these suits. It's not just Block 1. They went after, like I said, quite a few. But the lawsuit claims that Block 1 promoted, offered, and sold the U.S. token in the U.S. It refers to the $24 million settlement between Block 1 and the SEC over this issue. And it claims that Dan Larimer, the company's CTO, appeared at the crypto conference Consensus in New York in May 27 to promote EOS, and that the token was advertised on a billboard in Times Square. The lawsuit claims to represent those who purchased EOS tokens in the ICO and those who purchased them via crypto exchanges. So, again, seems like it's asking for some money. What usually happens with a lot of these well-funded organizations, and I'm saying collectively here, I'm not talking about any specific one, but it'll be interesting to see how this progresses, because one of the tactics that's often used is a delay in trial to essentially weed out the people filing the lawsuits. It can become very costly over a number of years to continue an effort like that. So we'll have to see if that tactic is used here, and more importantly, if there's any validity to this allegation. So that's what's going on there, guys. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but that was pretty big news today. And with that said, I guess what I'd like to do next is take some questions and discussions. What are you doing right now in this quarantine? It's not really an agenda. It's a no-holds-barred type topic that we can chat about today. And I think what I'd like to do at some point here is maybe even have like a Zoom link where you guys can call in and chat and provide your thoughts, because it, just to make it a little bit more of a dynamic environment. But what I'm doing here is, like I said, today I actually went out to work outside. So it's a little more challenging to do that now, because there's actually a lot more people out and about on a single trail. So instead of going on that trail with everybody else, what I do is I actually drive to a large park, and basically there's a whole field there where nobody's around. And so it's easy enough to actually get a spot that's probably, a couple hundred feet to myself and go through that exercise, any kind of exercise I like to. So today was squats and lunges and push-ups, angled push-ups, and kind of more of a high interval type training, I guess, with different sprints. And so that seemed to work pretty well. And this afternoon, out in the patio. So right before it goes to sundown, probably just lay out there and get some vitamin D, because that's what you guys all should be doing, um, just to keep your immunity up, right? So you gotta get the vitamin D and vitamin C, along with any other nutrients, right? So stop by today, and or not today, yesterday, and picked up some greens. Um, Obviously, with the greens, not that kind of greens, guys. Uh, the I guess salad greens, not the greens you smoke. So with the greens that I had, I picked up some ones that I could actually bake in the oven, and the thought process there is to cook it, 400 degrees or whatever temperature is needed to kill any bacteria. The problem with the salad I thought through is it could be potentially contaminated, and then I would be ingesting that that was in the store exposed to these other things that may or may not be there. So got some kale, which is hardy enough to make kale chips out of. Get some Brussels sprouts, okra, things like that, cabbage. So probably not as light as a salad, but trying to keep it healthy as much as possible with the mac and cheese mode that we got going on here. So I'm like gonna work on my mac and cheese. That's like my goal over the next couple weeks in perfecting a homemade version and keeping it simple. So it's actually been pretty good, and actually just working from home. So got a little office here, and I don't know about you guys, but I've actually been more productive working from home than I have been at the office. And I think the reason is because it's a lot more quiet and just able to focus in, wake up early, and run conference calls remote. And so it does beg the question, just more on the long-term basis. And I'm kind of curious what your experience has been, guys, on this is, what the future of work is, because what this is showing is that we're actually able to do like 80 to 90% of our jobs. A lot of us are remotely, and it doesn't necessarily require it doesn't necessarily seem to require going into an office to be responsible, to actually get it done, to do designs. None of this seems to be required. So it almost starts to, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on, I guess, which side of the fence you're on, it starts to open up some questions for those that may have not even considered this about the benefits of working remotely in certain businesses or services that you could offer. So that's just something to maybe consider. But I've definitely started to think about that more given this experience, and it's just something I thought I'd share. The one thing that is a little bit of a challenge now is just the blurring of the lines between home and work. So because we are just in quarantine mode, it's a little hard to have that division between your work and your home. So still trying to get, I guess, used to that, guys. But let me know your thoughts if you have any comments on that. What are some things you're enjoying right now in this period of time? I'm finding that I'm actually valuing things I took for granted a lot more, obviously. So food is one of them, and different kinds of food that obviously I don't have in my yard. So much more, I guess, grateful that we have farmers and people who grow this food for us for the time being. And now understanding and learning that I should be, and I'm going to be growing my own food. So there's like there's these outlooks I shared with you guys today, but I think in the back of my mind, at least, there's like this longer term plan that I guess we all need to decide or think through, because if you think about this whole scenario that occurred with the COVID-19 and this quarantine period, is as a nation, we didn't have the ability to produce our mask and to produce the PPE and the test, and we didn't have the ability to do it quickly, and we weren't organized. So the issue or response became much more impacted because of that inability to have those supplies and those production facilities, I think. Now, you could take that same argument and bring it down to the individual level, and the fact that we don't have, most of us, I would say, don't have ability to grow our own food currently. We're not self-sustaining. Would we actually encounter the same or similar scenario to what we're seeing with the states and the government's response to this crisis? And it seems like the answer is yeah. So it sort of starts to suggest that we should, as people, co-organize with one another and start like growing our own food and kind of becoming more off-grid. So I'm actually interested to know if any of you guys are thinking along those lines, and I'd like to actually connect with you because I think you certainly can do it yourself, but there are also benefits to working with other people to create something like that. So I have different skills, and I'd like to know what you guys would envision for something like that, if that's something you're into. And who knows, maybe there's an opportunity for us to look at that in this, while this quarantine is occurring. I mean, there could be tremendous opportunities to maybe pick up land or a farm and just have that as a backup plan. It doesn't hurt. So that's all I'm going to say about that. But anyways, this is Phoenix. Thanks for tuning into my videos. If you like this content, hit the like button and consider subscribing. And until next time, I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.